We acknowledge that TriCities Community Television operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them along with the waters and all that is above and below.
Hi, it's Cathy Cena with TriCities Community TV, and we'd like to thank the Coquitlam Library for donating their space to us today. And we continue our election candidate interviews. And in the studio, we have Iain Black, running for the Conservatives in the Coquitlam-Port Coquitlam riding. Iain, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely.
You bet.
I want to get started with why should people vote for you, Iain?
Well, I think when it comes to elected representation, you want to find a balance of community perspective and experience that actually matters. Mm-hmm. I understand a lot about the economy and job creation and a lot of the challenges that we're being faced, in many ways because I've run small businesses for most of my life. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the tech sector. I've run about 7 or 8 different technology companies in my time. And I add to that the experience of twice being an elected official. I was very proudly an MLA and cabinet minister from the TriCities back in 2005 and 2009. Had some marvelous experience there that I intend to bring to the role as Member of Parliament. And then for about 8 years, I was the president and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, which gave me an extraordinary perspective on a lot of the challenges facing the communities across the Lower Mainland and a lot of the issues that are presenting many problems in our own region here in the Tri-Cities, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the next little while. Mm-hmm. But then beyond that is the community connection. I mean, I've raised my family here. I've got now 3 adult children, and last time I did an interview like this, they were 5, 3, and 1. They are now 25, 23, and 21. And I had no gray hair the last time we did this, but it's in that time you really develop enormous connections into the community, whether it was coaching and managing their sports teams, or just watching the changes in the community, the things that are encouraging and inspiring, and the things that are very discouraging and very, very concerning. And that, candidly, is what brought me back into elected life. I'm desperately concerned about what's happening in our country, and I want to do something about it, and I think I've got the right collection of skills and experiences to lend to the equation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what does civic leadership mean to you, and how does that play out in your role as an MP representing your riding?
Well, I actually think that's a really important question. I think that one of the things that civic leadership is all about is, first of all, engaging. It's a lot of listening. It's also showing examples. I think when you think of young adults and then young children, their understanding of what it takes to build a community is fairly limited, but it's also directly tied to what they see and what they see around them. So civic leadership for me is leading by example. It starts with things like coaching hockey and soccer, and it could be the Boy Scouts or the Girl Guides, that kind of engagement. It also involves getting involved in matters that are of concern to you. So a lot of people volunteer in political campaigns. They might get involved with our amazing service clubs like the Kinsmen or the Rotary. And the ability to give to your community is a value system. And I think it starts in the family. It has to be encouraged by the schools. And frankly, people my age have to show that and illustrate that it's a good and it's an important and it's a valued thing. Mm-hmm. So civic leadership, I think, is at a very, very high level, can show up in a lot of different ways. And I think that it's really drawing upon the best and brightest in our community to show it and to make it clear that this is a good way to contribute to community and that you have an obligation to do so.
Okay. How will you collaborate with municipal and provincial leaders in the Tri-Cities to meet the community needs effectively?
Well, this is actually something that I think is missing at the moment. We've had 10 years where I don't believe there has been a lot of that from our federal Liberal government. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to replace a member of Parliament named Ron McKinnon. And I don't see a lot of that collaboration at all. It's one of the things that I find very, very concerning. It starts by listening. Like each of the city of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam have got some very clear priorities. Those have to be reflected and they have to be carried forward by the elected representation. Mm. I had this experience once before when I was MLA. And when I was here, I worked with the members of Parliament, and that time it was James Moore at the Conservative government under then Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and the various cities. At that time it was Coquitlam and Port Moody and Anmore and Belcarra, so I had 4 mayors and 4 city councils to deal with, and I had to be on top of what mattered to them. It was my job, and it was my job to carry forward their torch into Victoria the same way that it should be done in Ottawa, carrying forward the torch of the ideas and the priorities of these communities so that you do your bit to bring the resources to bear on the citizens and on the cities from the senior levels of government. It has not been done well in the last 10 years, and I want to do something about that.
Affordable housing continues to be a major concern. What steps will you be taking at a federal level to support housing solutions in our region?
Well, the housing affordability problem has several elements to it, and it is arguably one of the top things I hear at the doorstep. People are horrified at the fact that housing is now twice as expensive as it was 10 years ago. And that's at a time when they're also trying to deal with food prices that are 20% higher just in the last 5 years, for 3% less, no less. And an accelerated rate of cost that is actually 37% higher than just south of the border in Washington State. So it's not acceptable. Housing is more expensive because of a variety of factors. One of them is inflation. The spending of our federal government took our inflation to levels that has not been seen for generations. That has caused everything to be more expensive. You add on to that a challenge with immigration. You can't let in 1.2 million people into the country and only build 200,000 homes. So you have a series of decisions that have been made by the federal government, where Ron McKinnon supported and voted for every one of them, that has led us to where we are right now. There's many levels to the solution because there's many levels to the problem. So here's some of the things that we're going to do. We've already announced that we will remove GST from any new home up to $1.3 million. That will immediately save $65,000 in the cost of a new home. We've also added a second $50,000 of tax release that'll be based on a municipality matching that same reduction through lowering what are called CACs and DCCs, which are hidden costs in a home which have ballooned under this government to up to 35% of the cost of a new build. So in combination, you've got up to $115,000 that a Conservative government will bring in terms of the relief to the cost of a new home. And what's really important, Cathy, is to understand that the cost of a new home is really important because it sets the benchmark for all the existing housing stock, condos and homes that people are going to sell once they've decided to move to a new one. Because their benchmark will be, well, what is a new house going for? What is a new condo going for? So if you can start getting those costs down by removing the red tape and the serious amount of taxation that is involved in each of those new homes right now, that will also balance and bring down the cost of the existing housing market and finally start making it more affordable for the families here in the Tri-Cities.
What are your thoughts on the pressure that's being put on cities to increase densification, primarily around SkyTrain?
Well, I'm very proud of the role that I had in what is now the Millennium Line extension. For years it was called the Evergreen Line. That was the project name, right? And I was actively involved in that with the then Conservative federal government, and that was part of $4 billion of infrastructure that came to the Tri-Cities in the 2 election cycles that I was elected. Right? And part of our biggest concern we have right now is there's been nothing built in this region for 10 years. Like, we literally had $4 billion invested, and whether it was the Pitt River Bridge or the Coast Meridian overpass, the new Portman Bridge, the interchange, the Cape Horn interchange, the SkyTrain I just mentioned, the Eleanor Ward Bridge. This is a ton of stuff, but SkyTrain in particular is very special because the design point of SkyTrain is that it's supposed to bring densification. And urban studies all over the globe shows that that happens. When you build rapid transit and you invest in public transit, the densifications around those stations naturally happen. I don't think we've fully leveraged it yet the way that we can, but I think both Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam have been actually pretty balanced in how they're approaching it. They're engaging their communities. The population continues to rise. We have to have places to put people. And I think using public transit investment as a magnet for that type of densification, it makes sense and has worked elsewhere in the world, and there's no reason it can't work here with the thoughtful approach that's being taken by the 2 cities that I'm trying to represent.
Great. Transit and infrastructure are critical in growing cities. What projects or initiatives are underway to improve mobility in the Tri-Cities?
Well, shockingly, not that many. And again, this is one of the reasons why I think it's unacceptable that for 10 years, Ron McKinnon and the federal Liberals have not invested in the Tri-Cities. It's been 10 years. I'm at the doorsteps with people right now and asking them, tell me one thing that's been built here in 10 years. I mean, I gave you a list a few minutes ago of all those bridges, right? And a SkyTrain line, like $4 billion. The federal Liberals have been in power for 10 years. There's been nothing spent in this area. The last piece of infrastructure that was built in this community that anyone can recognize is the Port Coquitlam Community Center. Marvelous facility. But that was promised and money committed by James Moore before he left as a Conservative member of Parliament under Stephen Harper. So, You talk about the transportation initiatives underway right now. There aren't any. But I'll tell you what, if you ask the people, particularly your elected officials in the city of Coquitlam and the city of Port Coquitlam, they'll identify a couple of things. They'll identify that the Coquitlam River Bridge is one of the oldest pieces of infrastructure in the Lower Mainland, right? It's an old rusty bridge, desperately needs to be replaced. Where's the federal government been on that? What about the Fremont Connector? Connecting the people of Burke Mountain down onto the major road infrastructure without having to put more traffic on Coast Meridian and northern Port Coquitlam, and that desperately needs to be done. Where's the federal government on that? And then in Coquitlam, their biggest challenge is really overpass over the railway system. We've got the CP rail lines, we are in one of the biggest transportation corridors in North America, and that rail has to get to the port back and forth, right? But it goes through a municipality. It goes through a couple of them actually, and they desperately need some overpasses built. Where's the conversations been with the port and the federal government and these municipalities? We have not had somebody at the table as a member of parliament helping direct that conversation, bringing to bear the resources of the federal government, and I would like to see that changed.
What is your perspective on the impact of past and potential future U.S. tariffs, such as those imposed during the Trump administration, on local industries and workers right here in the Tri-Cities, Iain?
Yeah, it's a very unsettling time right now. When I'm on the phone with the constituents or I'm at their doorstep, everybody is talking about President Trump and the tariffs that he's put in place and the on-again, off-again approach to it. And it's very real and it's very concerning for a lot of people. We're in a unique position in BC, right? You've got $500 million a day in trade floating in and out of that port. About 30-odd% of it, I think it's 34% of it, is destined for the United States by volume. So this is a very big deal. I've got a unique perspective on this because I was the province's trade minister. And the role I had at the time was to work with the government of the day and to get our reliance on the United States down. Every province in the country trades about 80% of their trade with the United States. In British Columbia, we got it down to as low as 50% by opening up relationships with South Korea and Japan and China and India. And as a result of that, in 2008, 2009, when we had that horrific financial market meltdown, BC got off very lightly compared to other parts of Canada. So we need to get back to building our trade relationships away from America because it appears they are on a very different path than we have enjoyed here for many, many generations. And we need to do something about interprovincial trade barriers. Again, I had that experience as a trade minister, and many of them are quite solvable if we put our mind to it. And I'll give you an easy example that your audience will find kind of cool or frustrating, depending on their perspective. When a truck leaves Victoria, BC, and it drives to St. John's, Newfoundland, it is actually offside with the law 17 times. We can't get the definition of a truck straight in this country. And it's also easier for us to get some craft brewery products out of the state of Washington, when we were willing to buy American products, than it is to get fantastic cheese from Quebec. Like, there's something wrong with this picture. But there now seems to be the focus on it, and I would personally be involved and advocating for getting those interprovincial barriers down as quickly as possible. It can be done. It's really just human nature that's holding it back, and we can solve that.
Okay. How do you engage directly with residents in your riding, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, to ensure their voices will be heard in Ottawa, Iain?
Well, again, I had the experience of doing this once before. It will only happen if you put your mind to it. I'm hearing repeatedly at the door that the community does not feel engaged or connected to Ron McKinnon as a member of parliament, right? That's what I'm being told. And the things that I did when I was an MLA involved, first of all, setting up proactively a series of community meetings, but you also have to go to where people are. Very often that meant going to city halls and sitting through council meetings as an invited guest or asking if you can come and listen to some of what's going on. Proactively requesting meetings with councillors and with the mayors to understand their priorities so you can reflect them as you do your work in Ottawa, or as it was for me then back in Victoria. I mean, this city of Coquitlam has got a really cool, I think they call it a youth council, right, which is marvelous. It kind of ties back to your question on civic engagement. What a wonderful thing to be engaging our young people, to help them understand some of the conversations happening at a municipal or city hall level. And so part of your job would be to engage with them. Find out what they're hearing. What do they find is important? How do they think that will affect them going forward? So you've got to go where the people are. And the last thing I'd say on that is we now live in an age of technical advancement that even in the couple of decades since I last did this, we have Zoom and Teams and all kinds of technology available to us now that you can't actually use the several thousand miles that separate Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam from Ottawa as a reason not to be on the phone or on a Teams meeting of some kind in the evenings to talk to concerned citizens. Mm-hmm. The onus is on the elected representative to do that, and I have that commitment taking into this job.
Okay, what federal resources or programs should Tri-City residents be more aware of or take advantage of?
Well, I think you're at a crossroads right now. I think the programs of the last 10 years have, in many, many cases, failed. When you look at the terrible situation that we have in housing, for example, the housing programs that have been put forth by the federal Liberals to date have involved effectively loan programs, which are basically continuing to fuel an overheated market. So that's not particularly helpful when people can't afford the mortgages, but they've been given access to funding to effectively mortgage themselves for an extra decade or two than their parents or grandparents did. So I think there's a whole revisitation of what these programs are all about that's likely to take place going forward. We've made it clear what we want to do on housing affordability. We've made it clear what we want to do when it comes to law enforcement. I think there are some programs that have to be addressed, and by that I mean legislative changes. There's no question that people are not feeling safe on the streets in the Tri-Cities. We just had 2 incidences in the last couple of days that are horrifying. 2 police officers put on fire in the downtown east side. And then here in Port Coquitlam, somebody was released from prison after being caught with over a pound of cocaine, a scale to help deal the drugs, an illegal firearm, fake ID, and license plates. And not only was he only given 2 years of a sentence, but because of time served waiting for his sentencing, he's on the streets today. And the community has made it very, very clear that they're just not okay with that. And the changes need to be made. The Liberals changed 2 laws in particular. Ron McKinnon voted for those 2 laws, and we'll be changing those if we're given the opportunity to govern.
You talked a little bit about youth earlier, and youth are very important. Youth and civic engagement are crucial for a healthy democracy. How are you encouraging young people in the Tri-Cities to get involved?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. It has been a point of inspiration for me to see the number of young people that have rallied around our campaign. And it actually comes back to a similar theme that I mentioned a couple of questions ago, which is you've got to go where they are, they being the youth in this case, and you've got to invite them in. I mean, we are fortunate, I was telling you just before we started here, that right now as we sit here, we've got 15 to 20 people out banging on doors for us, and most of them are under the age of 20. And they have shown up, they've shown some interest, we trained them up, we've given them a sense of belonging, we've had a lot of fun with them, a lot of Dairy Queen and Tim Hortons in the last year, I can tell you. And then in addition to which, this morning in particular, 2 or 3 people showed up that we'd never met before. They're coming with their friends. Because when you create an environment where you're interested in what people have to say, and this applies frankly to middle-aged people and senior citizens as much as it does youth. When you create a welcoming environment and you're inviting people in and you're listening to what they have to say, you don't always have to agree. But if you don't get them talking and sharing their perspective, you're not going to learn anything about them. And as an elected person, it means you're not going to be able to represent them nearly as well. And candidly, it's inspiring and humbling to listen to what they have to say. Because I think, especially with our youth, we too often are willing to go down the path of the stereotype, that their heads are in their phones. They're not really focused on anything beyond their immediate circle that's so limited now with the downside of social media. But I have to tell you, the moment those phones are put down, we've got some wonderful, exciting, and interesting and interested young people involved in what we're doing right now. And going forward as an elected person, I would continue that in the role. Because A, it's selfishly, it's fun for me, but it's also wonderfully educational.
Okay. Looking ahead, Iain, what is your vision for the future of the Tri-Cities, and how will you work as an MP to contribute to that?
I am putting my hat back into the ring and asking for the support of the community, because there's a sense of decay in our community that I really think has to be addressed. So my vision of the Tri-Cities is really what it was like when I moved here over 30 years ago, at the time with a 1-year-old. And it was a different place then. Like, I didn't have headlines about shootings at Coquitlam Centre. We didn't have the horrific situation in and around 3030 Gordon. Right? We didn't have housing that was out of reach for two-income families who could be each making $100,000 to $150,000, and they can't afford a home, or if they can, they're mortgaging themselves for 35 or 40 years. And hearing young people, as I've heard on the doorstep, who are deciding not to have children because they don't see how they could afford it, and they don't want to bring children into a world where there's serious concerns about public safety. Mm-hmm. And they think back to their childhood and they're going, it's not the same as it was. So how do I see us getting there? Definitely we have to step up to public safety, which I touched on a few minutes ago. We have to give the police the tools they need. And we have to change the justice system around bail and sentencing, as I mentioned a moment ago, by reversing those two liberal laws they're deeply flawed and arguably very reckless. And when you get the police coming out, police unions, which happened just the other day in, I think it was Brampton, and the police officers, the police chief of Vancouver, talking about some people just need to be incarcerated over those two officers who were horrifically put on fire. Thankfully, they're both okay, for those of your viewers who didn't see the story. So public safety is a really, really big part of it. And the transportation infrastructure has to be built. Like, we have added over 40,000 people in our Tri-Cities area since Ron McKinnon was elected. Where are the roads? Where are the bridges? Where are the show me something that reflects you've got a member of parliament who's dialed in to what has changed in the community and has brought the full resources of the federal government to bear on the community. You can't. So again, I see a Tri-Cities where people are moving around more easily. I see more train cars being added to SkyTrain. I mean, I see more people using the public systems that are already in place. I want to see more of them. And candidly, we need to be more cooperative around the other municipal needs that take place at the moment. And I don't see that happening at all. Broadly speaking, I want to get back to what it was like when I first moved here, right? Where we didn't walk around in fear, where you didn't look over your shoulder walking your dog at night in otherwise fairly affluent parts of the community. And that can get that way again, but we have to want it to as citizens. We have to stand up and we have to vote for a value system that says these experiments of the last decade have failed miserably, and we have to get back to some common sense, and Conservatives are going to bring that back.
So if you were talking to your constituents right now, a room full of your people, what would you want them to know, and what would you say to them just before we close?
I would encourage them not to be afraid. That there's nothing in front of us for all the challenges that we have, and they are very real, right? We've got families struggling in our community. We've got, single parents who are choosing food items of a higher quality for their children at the expense of lesser quality for themselves. That's not okay. We've got senior citizens who are worried, especially with some of what's happening in America, around whether they got the retirement income that they thought they were going to have. And we've got a series of societal challenges around drugs and crime and affordability. These can be solved. And so my message would be, you can elect people who can deconstruct the problems that we've got, solve them systematically, and get us to a better place than where we are right now. But we're not going to get there by continuing to elect the same people who got us into this problem in the first place. And the cast of characters that are presenting themselves in the Liberal Party federally are the exact same people who've been there for 10 years, including their leader, who was the top advisor to Justin Trudeau for the last 5 years. So change is possible, but you got to vote for it.
Thank you so much, Iain. Today we're listening to Iain Black, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam candidate for the Conservative Party. I'm Cathy Cena with Tri-Cities Community TV. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to get out and vote on April 28th.